Welcome to South Hill United Methodist Church's 11 p.m. Christmas Eve worship service. This is new for us, and I know while you're at home celebrating, I thought I would be at home celebrating with you in mind. Tonight we're going to be looking at some carols, quite a few of our favorites. We'll be looking at the history behind them and then singing them together, since we haven't been able to do a whole lot of that together when we are in person. So sit back, let's celebrate and bring in Christmas with joy. Our first carol for this evening is the last song we sang at our 5 o'clock service, Silent Night. It's one of the best known. It was written by a pair of Austrians. Pastor Joseph Mohr wrote the lyrics in 1816. And Franz Gruber, who was a local school teacher and composer and organist at the Church of St. Nicholas in Oberndorf, wrote the music that we know in 1818. There is a legend around it that the organ broke down and they needed a song for Christmas Eve Mass that was on guitar only. The truthfulness of that legend is somewhat unknown and a little suspect, but it is kind of a cool story. It was picked up by some family singers, the Strassers, in 1832 in a concert, and then in 1839 it made it to New York in America. It became very popular. By 1914 it was well known by people all over the world, and there is the story of the Christmas Eve in 1914 in the midst of World War I, and all of a sudden all the guns stopped on Christmas Eve, and Silent Night was heard in German from the German front and in English from the American front. And it was just this kind of amazing story of a temporary ceasefire that really reached people and touched hearts. So let us sing together 2 verses of Silent Night. Thanks to the bells for accompanying those 2 verses. Hopefully we'll see and hear more from them in the future. Our second carol this evening is Hark, the Herald Angels Sing, one that everybody knows. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this carol is that neither the lyric writer, Charles Wesley, nor the melody writer, Felix Mendelssohn, would have ever wanted their words and music to be married together in the way that they are. Charles was a prolific hymn writer and brother of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, and he wrote those lyrics in the year 1739. He originally called it, "Hark, how all the welkin rings, glory to the King of Kings." Welkin is an old word for the vault of heaven, the place where stars and angels dwell. In 1753, George Whitefield changed the title, cut some of the verses, and altered a few of the lines to make the modern lyrics that he published in a collection called Hymns and Sacred Poems. Then nearly 100 years later, in 1840, Felix Mendelssohn wrote a tune for a cantata to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the invention of the Gutenberg printing press. And in 1855, after Mendelssohn's death, organist Dr. William Cummings chose to use that melody to accompany the old lyrics of Wesley and Whitefield. Neither Wesley nor Mendelssohn would probably have welcomed this, because Wesley preferred a slow and solemn tempo to all his religious music, and while Mendelssohn intended his upbeat tune to be secular only. And yet this fusion of the two different versions has become one of the most popular of all carols, and indeed one of only two which are never omitted from the world-famous service of 9 lessons and carols from King's College in Cambridge. Hark, the herald angels sing. Our next carol this evening is O Come All Ye Faithful. And the evidence about the history of this carol is conflicted, which makes it difficult to know exactly where it came from. But what we do know is that a Catholic hymn writer and supporter of Bonnie Prince Charlie's rebellion against King George II of England fled across the sea to France to escape persecution. His name was John Francis Wade, and in around 1743, he wrote down the lyrics of 4 verses of O Come All Ye Faithful. It was in Latin, a hymn named for the opening words of the first verse, Adeste Fidelis. It was first published in Cantus Diversi in 1751. What was the purpose of the hymn? Well, it was believed that O Come All Ye Faithful was really a coded show of support for the Catholic cause in England, the Jacobites. And the song was actually imploring the faithful to come to the aid of Prince Charles. Whatever the truth is, for John Francis Wade is the most likely author of those original 4 verses. The melody is also unclear in terms of authorship. Wade may have composed that too, but a similar tune is in an opera around that time. So who knows? They were published together for the first time in 1782, and 4 additional French verses were added later. And so the English text dates to 1841, when they were translated into English by Reverend Frederick Oakley, who called the carol, Ye Faithful, Approach Ye. How's that for a mouthful? So the great carol that we know was finally translated completely in 1885. So one that we know very well and sing quite often, but O come all ye faithful. Another carol for this evening is It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. The lyrics of this carol were written as a poem in 1849 by Edmund Sears, pastor of the Unitarian Church in Wayland, Massachusetts. And it appeared in print in the Christian Register in Boston on 29th of December, 1849. It's one of the earliest American carol compositions and quickly became one of the most popular. Two melodies have been used to adapt this poem to a carol, one simply known as Carol, composed by Richard Storrs Willis, a music critic in New York and a student of Felix Mendelssohn. Carol was written just 1 year after the poem, and it's the better-known tune in America. The second melody was adapted by Arthur Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan from an English tune in 1874. It was called Noel and is the more common accompaniment in the United Kingdom. So it depends on where you live as to which tune you sing. So that's our next carol. It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. Our next carol has a little less cheery title, In the Bleak Midwinter. In 1872, Christina Rossetti, a poet, wrote the words of In the Bleak Midwinter in response to a request by the American Scribner's Monthly magazine. They asked for a poem in celebration of Christmas. Then in 1904, long after Christina's death, the poem was published in a collection of her works. And in 1906, Gustav Holst was chosen to set the music. The tune which Holst composed is known as Cranham, after the village in Gloucestershire in which he was living. In 1909, a second medley for the same carol was created by organist Harold Dark. Both versions became and remain very popular in Britain, although in the United States, we really only hear the Holst version. So that's what we're going to sing. In the Bleak Midwinter. One of the favorite carols coming up next is especially popular with our children, Away in the Manger. And definitely one of the earliest ones I can remember as a child. I'm sure many of us can as well. It's a song which remains popular because of its gentle medley and its words. Away in a Manger was first published as 2 verses by James Murray in Philadelphia in the Lutheran Songbook, Little Children's Book for Schools and Families, back in 1885. The verses were subtitled Luther's Cradle Hymn, which has led to a commonly held belief that they were written by Martin Luther himself, but it seems there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. So the third verse, Be Near Me, Lord Jesus, was added by John McFarland in 1904, having been originally written for another song. So as with A Little Town of Bethlehem, there is a choice of different melody between America and the Old World. Music to which the lyrics are usually performed in America was composed and published by Murray in 1887 under the title Mueller. And the one in England was composed in 1885 by William Kirkpatrick. It is known as the Cradle Song. But here we go, Away in the Manger. While we're on carols that children know well, our next one, O Little Town of Bethlehem. It was the winter of 1865. Philip Brooks, the rector of the Church of the Holy Trinity in Philadelphia, visited the Holy Land. And in that itinerary was a horseback ride from Jerusalem to Bethlehem on Christmas Eve. 3 years later, inspired by that experience, Brooks composed the lyrics of this song. And his organist, Louis Redner, was asked to add music so it could be performed by the church's children's choir at Christmas. Neither Brooks nor Redner really expected much more from the carol, but in 1874, the Reverend Huntington, the rector of All Saints Church in Worcester, Massachusetts, chose to publish it in a Sunday school hymn book. In doing so, the carol was introduced to a much wider audience, and it grew in popularity across the world. And again, in places in the United Kingdom, a little different tune has been added to it at some point. But the version that we sing in the United States is the original tune. And let us sing Little Town of Bethlehem together. Our next carol is very different. Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's a number of spirituals that were included in John Wesley Work Jr.'s book, Folk Songs of the American Negro, a book published in 1907. Work was a professor at Fisk University in Nashville, and he compiled his collection to preserve the music of the slaves from the slave days. The consensus is that Go Tell It on the Mountain was first written by a slave and then had been sung by slaves or ex-slaves at least since 1865. The song took on a different life in the 1960s when Peter, Paul, and Mary rewrote some lyrics to turn it into a civil rights anthem, and it's become a popular song with children as well. So these diverse themes mean the song has been sung by a wider range of settings than almost any other carol, including concert halls and schools, protest marches, and of course, in churches. So it's a great carol of telling the story, right? So go tell it on the mountain. Isaac Watts, one of the most prolific of all English hymn composers, composed the words of our next carol, Joy to the World, all the way back in 1719. Never intended it to be a Christmas carol. At the time, it was belief of the Puritan tradition that only the biblical psalms could be sung in worship. Human compositions were not worthy to be compared with these divine pieces. But some, including Watts, felt that the psalms were not all that easy to sing. They could be said to be dreary. So, Joy to the World was Watts' adaptation of Psalm 98 to turn it into a popular singable hymn, and he chose to title it The Messiah's Coming and Kingdom. It was published in Psalms of David, imitated in the language of the New Testament. To Antioch, to which the words are usually sung, was added to the lyrics of Watts in a collection of hymns put together by the American church musician Dr. Lowell Mason more than 100 years later in 1839. Antioch contained a brief notation from Handel, leading to the belief that the tune was at least partially based on a theme from the great composer Handel, though it seems most likely that the primary composer was Lowell Mason himself. The combination of tune and Isaac Watts' words has made Joy to the World one of the most familiar of all carols, and one that is an absolute joy to sing. Joy to the World. I hope you have enjoyed our carol singing together this evening. I know I have. And I hope that we can continue this idea of the joy of this season, invading our very selves. And one of the best ways that we are touched by things is music. So let us go from here as Christmas morning approaches and be thankful and be joyous and go tell on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. Let us say, joy to the world, for the Lord has come. Let us talk about the story in Bethlehem and the angels and the shepherds, and it is the greatest story. Let Christ be in your heart. Let the joy of Christmas invade every part of you so that others may see who he is through us. As we depart this evening, will share with you a medley of carols, some of which we have already sung this evening, some of which we have not, that has been composed and compiled and put together from participants from all over the world. And so here is kind of a parting celebration of Christmas carols. Merry Christmas.